In the year 1927, the Carl D. Bradley was built by the American Shipbuilding Company of Lorena, Ohio. The ship measured 638 feet in length, 65 feet in width, and 33 feet in depth. She was launched on April 9th of 1927. At the time of its launch, it was the Queen of the Lakes, in other words, the largest vessel operating on the Great Lakes, and it immediately started breaking records. In 1929, it carried 18,113 tons on one trip, a record that was not broken until 1942. The Carl D. Bradley spent much of 1958 in layup, but would return to working on the Great Lakes by October. On Monday, November 17th at 6:30 p.m., the Carl D. Bradley departed Buffington, Indiana after discharging its limestone. It started running into whitecaps, but there was no reason to worry. The ship had been through many storms and would certainly survive this small one. But by next morning, on Tuesday, November 18th, gale warnings were posted. But the big ship still moved on, as many big freighters do in storms. Although the crew of the Bradley wasn't worried that the ship was in any danger, they still took precautions. The ship was riding up Lake Michigan empty, and all seamen know that an empty vessel takes a worse beating than a vessel loaded with cargo. So, to counteract that, they decided to add 9,000 tons of water ballast to act as a cargo. By mid-afternoon, on November 18th, the Carl D. Bradley had made it to the mid-center of Lake Michigan. At this point, the wind had increased to about 65 miles an hour, and the waves were now hitting up to 30 feet. The ship was doing fine in the storm. It was fluxing like any normal big ship would do in a storm like this, and there were no creaks or groans to indicate any means of worry. The ship continued through the storm without any problems, except for the occasional rivet popping off here and there. By 5:15 p.m., Captain Roland Bryan radioed Bradley Transportation Line, which owned the vessels, that he would arrive at Rogers City by 2 a.m. Approximately 16 minutes later, First Mate Elmer Fleming and Captain Roland Bryan heard an unusual thud come from the back of the vessel. They turned around and looked to see that the stern section of the Bradley was sagging in the water. Captain Bryan then rang the general alarm, and 20 seconds later, there was another thud. At this point, Bryan ordered Fleming to send out distress signals. Coast Guard signalmen from different points on the Great Lakes all heard the Bradley's chilling calls for help. As First Mate Fleming was still talking, there was another thud. A third thud. At this point, the middle of the ship humped upward as the aft section sagged towards the lake further down. As First Mate Fleming was still sending out distress calls, Captain Bryan gave the order to abandon ship. Just then, a fourth thud rang out, and the vessel sloped upward, and the stern sagged for the last time ever. The ship then split in two, tearing many power cables, which caused the front end of the ship to lose power. It was left in total darkness. All of a sudden, the bow section started to roll, and many crew members climbed to the high side of the vessel. At the same time, deck watch Frank Mays and First Mate Elmer Fleming were thrown into the frigid waters of Lake Michigan. Near them, they found a raft and settled on it with two other crew members. As they all settled on the raft, they watched the stern section of the vessel sink into Lake Michigan. Meanwhile, a 250-foot German boat had heard its call for Mayday and was only 4 miles away from the scene. The name of the ship was the Christian Satori, and would come to the aid of any survivors of the Bradley. The ship fought its way through the storm, but it took 2 hours for it to arrive at the scene. Upon arriving at the scene, they only found a raincoat and a tank that had been apparently torn from the Bradley. Captain Muller of the Christian Satori believed that all hands of the vessel were lost because no lifeboats were visible. Later at 11:30 p.m., the Satori was joined by two Coast Guard vessels, the Sundew and the Hollyhock. They crisscrossed the area, but found nothing. 4 minutes later, on the raft that 4 sailors on the Carl D. Bradley held onto for dear life flipped, and only 3 sailors were able to make it back. By the morning of November 19th, only 2 remained, Elmer Fleming and Frank Mays. On that very day, a Coast Guard helicopter had spotted the raft, and by 9:07 a.m., the Sundew had came to the scene to the 2 remaining survivors of the Carl D. Bradley. They were rescued and survived. Out of all of the cities on the Great Lakes that were mourning the loss of loved ones, Rogers City had the biggest cry. Of the 33 crew members that had sailed on the Carl D. Bradley, 23 of them had lived in Rogers City. As family members continued to mourn for their loved ones, they started to question the structural sound of the vessel. 2 years before it sank, the vessel had been hit by the right rose in the exact area where she had split apart. While in the dry dock, a crack had been spotted. In May of 1958, it grounded in the harbor of Cedarville, which resulted in some minor damage. And then another grounding in November of 1958 fractured a hull plate that was right beneath the engine room of the Bradley. But the ship still made it through the U.S. Coast Guard inspections in both the years 1957 and 1958. After an investigation in 1959, the United States Coast Guard inquiry said that the vessel broke up and foundered under conditions which, while severe, she should have been able to weather, leads inevitably to the conclusion that the vessel had developed an undetected structural weakness or defect. This means that the vessel was not sound to sail on the Great Lakes, and that, the Bradley transportation line should have kept her laid up for the entire season, and repairs should have been done. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.